basketball, with both teams lining up opposite each other, but one team then throws the ball down the middle of the tunnel. Lineouts restart play after the ball, or a player carrying it, has gone out of bounds, or into touch.
Hello and welcome to Models of the Future Workplace. We're joined today by Katie Morrow, Senior Director of People Operations at Podium, one of the hottest, coolest startups here in Silicon Slopes. Maybe we'll hear a little bit more about their future world domination. But today we're going to be talking about the future workplace and the impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic and how that's affected the way that we look at the workplace and the way that employees engage in the workplace. We're fortunate to be sponsored today by R0, super cool technology that makes the workplace even safer. This little guy right here, not so little, is a futuristic robot which will go in and clean your space. You should check them out at r0.com. So, Katie, thank you for joining us. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Have you been on this stage before?
I haven't. I'm so excited to be here with you guys today.
Yeah, it's kind of like a little initiation.
Yeah,
into
rite of passage.
The rites of passage of Silicon Slopes.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to hear your perspective on this whole thing. The future of the workplace has really come into question, just like kind of the future of of the dot-com future when the dot-com bust happened, right?
Yeah.
There was like this whole flux period, and everybody was trying to figure out what happens next. And now we're just coming out of that COVID dark ages and into the period of enlightenment.
Yeah.
And let's figure out what's going to happen. So let's first talk about what changed about your policy, your people operations policy during the pandemic, and what do you think actually sticks? So what is it that, you made probably some big changes, but what do you think it is that's the thing that's going to persevere after this?
Yeah, you're right. A lot of changes happened. I think we all adapted. Pre-COVID, we were actually very much 100% in the office, Monday through Friday, every department in Lehigh. And we had about 10 remote employees across the country. We have an office in Brazil and one in Australia, but if you were in the US, you were most likely working in office 100% of the time. And I think we're going to transition back into the office in some capacity. We're figuring out what that looks like. But I think what stays is hiring remote. We've been able to find really, really bar-raising, diverse candidates outside of our market. And I think we'll continue to do that, especially for departments like engineering or our product team. And I think that stays.
Do you call that decentralized? Are you feeling like you're decentralizing your people operations? Do you have a specific strategy, or is it kind of just an emergent strategy?
As far as hiring remote talent, there's some markets, that we know have a lot of tech talent, and so we tend to focus on those. But really, it's where the best talent is, and it's given us so much more flexibility and ability to grow fast and be competitive while increasing diversity. We'll still, the mass majority of our population will still be in Utah, but we're not limited by geography anymore.
Okay, that's interesting. And so for those of you who may not be familiar with Podium, Podium has gone from, a small group of guys I think they were in an office down in Provo, hacking away at their thing only 4 years ago? It's like 4 years ago, right?
Yeah,
4 years ago?
5 now.
5?
But yeah, started in an apartment in Provo, moved to a bike shop in Provo, and yeah,
A lot of good
growing
things
fast.
come out of bike shops.
Yeah,
What do you think? So and now how many people work at Podium?
we're just over 1,000.
Oh my gosh, that's
Yeah.
a lot of people.
It is a lot of
It's
people.
a lot of people operations.
It
So
is.
what changed about your role and the job that you had to do when the pandemic hit, and how does that continue forward?
Yeah, I think we had to be a lot more intentional about connection. When you're in the office, culture just happens organically. For a culture training, there's a lot of things that can happen just very organically by proximity. You go to our distributed working model, and you have to be much more intentional and thoughtful about the way that you create those connections. And it's been a fun challenge.
Have you put structure around that? Do you have actual programming that you've figured out how to engineer that?
Yeah, I mean, we're fortunate that diversity has always been something that we really, really value. And our employee resources group, so like our BIPOC group and our Women at Podium group and our Pride group at Podium, have always been this kind of amazing center for connection and community. And we decided to financially invest more into those communities so that we were able to invest where connection happened. So that was one way.
So when you say financially invest, are you talking about putting money into orchestrating events and programming for those specific groups within the company? Is that what you're referring to? Is there anything else there?
Yeah, so we actually, all of our club leaders, anybody that leads one of those communities also has another full-time job. And so we incentivized that position with compensation.
Oh, how cool is that?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of unique.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting response. You said, look, we're not going to be in close proximity. We need more intentional connection. We're going to actually allow people, how does somebody get, so it's an actual role. Does it have a title? Like leader of what would you say, the Pride group or the women's group? Or
Yeah, so it would be a community leader.
Community leader title.
It's a position.
A part of your other full-time role.
Your other full-time role. Yeah, it was something that happened, these individuals were investing a lot of time doing, leading the clubs pre-COVID, and then we said, you know what? You're investing a lot of time. We should financially reward you for that investment and commitment. And so it's worked really well. But yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's the first time I've heard that. That's
Yeah.
super cool. Okay, cool. What else? What other best practice have you put in place that you think actually is something that's going to stick?
Something else that we do that I think is pretty cool is just, this has been, I think, a product of COVID and working remote. And as we scale, as you mentioned, we went from 2 guys to 1,000 in a period of 5 years. And that is hard to just make sure internal communications doesn't slip and you're all rowing in the same direction.
Especially if you're not all together, right? It becomes more complicated.
Yeah, and so one thing that we've tried is rolling out a company-wide podcast. And so we've loved that. It's been a great way to share stories and content and vision and get people bought in and just kind of create a lot more another platform for shared information.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it'll go around to different departments or different people within the company, and they'll be participants in the podcast.
Correct. Yeah.
That's fun. Who runs the podcast?
So one of our members of our audio team runs the podcast, and then usually Eric, our CEO, hosts it. But it's a wide range of topics. It could be anything from our founding story to interviewing our CEO on the financial future of the company. It's a great way to be very transparent.
The rise of micro company media.
Yeah.
This is going to be very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because now you have, just like you have a broad television audience or something you're always trying to connect with, now if you have a decentralized workforce, you actually may need a media, a little micro media thing inside of the company, keep that flow of information going.
Yeah, so far it's worked really, really well to maintain
That's
that
cool.
connection. Yeah.
Okay. Wow, Katie. So we've already covered like two really interesting things. What else? Take your podium hat off for a little bit. Tell us, where do you think we're going to be in 5 years in terms of what is the role of the workplace 5 years from now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I honestly think that there will always be a role for a physical workplace. I think that we all learned that there's some things that cannot replace an in-person meeting and collaborative session, and that's why we have the benefit of flying people in. Even if they're living in New York, they can fly in for a working session. And so I think long-term, there will be a huge kind of bottoms-up approach to the way we build our workforce. Like, I think our employees are going to have a bigger voice in the way that we build the future of our workplace.
Can you just unpack that a little bit? Because that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, little things like we're about to roll out another engagement survey asking people, what can we do to amp up your experience? What do you need? How can we support you? Do you need more access to leadership? There's a wide range of things that we're asking for, and we will create policy and best practices around what our team members need in order to be successful.
Interesting. So yeah, you're continuing to glean insights and really hone in on constant feedback from your employee base.
Yeah.
What do you think was the biggest pain point for you as the Senior Director of People Operations at Podium over the last 12 months? What was the hardest thing you had to deal with?
Man, I think honestly it was retraining and creating a muscle in our leaders that they never had to flex before.
Okay, what is that?
How do you lead dispersed workforce? Like, how do you coach a team when they're not, before, I'll take our sales team, for example, we, onboard so many young sales reps. It was so easy to be like, okay, go sit down. We're all sitting in an open environment. Listen to their call. Listen to that demo. But when you're not doing that, you have to come up with a whole new strategy to train and develop people. And when you don't have the benefit of proximity.
I think that is so insightful. I think that, I did an MBA like, a few other folks. Maybe somebody listening here has done business degrees. I don't think there's a course out there. I don't know of a course that's called Leading a Distributed Workforce. Right? I never remember any management coaching around like, okay, so if you have a remote employee versus a face-to-face employee, here's how your management style has to change. You need probably smaller, more frequent check-ins, right?
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely.
What else comes along with that kind of shift in leadership style?
Yeah, I think making sure there's a lot of communication paths, like asynchronous communication, that you guys are collaborating on like a shared document or Slack or just expectation setting, really. Like, I think you have to be much more intentional about setting expectations and making sure that you're communicating in a way that your employee is hearing you and vice versa.
Yeah. That's interesting, isn't it? Expectations, because I just noticed, and maybe somebody else out there noticed this, but when we first started with the pandemic, we were doing like virtual events, like happy hours on Zoom, and let's play Monopoly on Zoom, and by 6 months in, it was like, let's keep this meeting to 20 minutes, and like half the people didn't have their cameras on. So you kind of have to set a standard up, like, hey, a virtual meeting is successful at X number of minutes, and everybody needs to have their camera on.
Yeah. Yeah, we did training around how to run an effective meeting.
Really?
Yeah.
You did, online, like an effective virtual meeting.
Yep, and it included things like agendas and pre-reads, and our strategy team actually is doing training across the company on a rapid decision-making model to make sure that whoever's in the meeting needs to be there and knows their role, and we can move quickly, and we're not telling people to sit on Zoom calls for 8 hours of their day. So a lot of it's leadership development.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about, remote first, office first, hybrid. All these words have come up, but we haven't touched enough on the future of hybrid leadership, or the future of like leading distributed or remote teams. That's a really fascinating thing, how you help employees to feel engaged, teams to work effectively together. What do you think how's it gonna work with Podium, where you have, or how is it working with Podium, where you have, say, half the team in the office and half the team distributed? How's that going?
So far, so good. There's some simple things, like we actually put in hardware in all of our meeting rooms to make sure they're Zoom compatible.
Right.
That you can log in and people that are remote are having a good experience, and they're not like, we can't hear you, and it's this whole 10 minutes of back and forth.
Super awkward.
Yeah, super awkward.
Your mic's not on. You're on mute.
Yeah. And part of it's, I feel like if we wouldn't have all gone home and built a muscle of empathy and the skill set it takes to, have, people in their home or their kids in the background, or, all of these things, I feel like we were kind of forced into this steep learning curve, and now it feels easier to have half of the people in the office and half of the people at home. Because of that, I feel like we have developed a new skill, and it's gotten easier.
Brilliant. Okay, we're going to end with a quick moment. We're going to call this your guru moment. Your guru moment is, I want you just to forecast the future of work is going to be blank in, doesn't have to be in 5 or 10 years, but in the world of Katie Morrow, when you look out into that distant future and you say the workplace and work life, or let's just call it the model of the future workplace, is going to be X. Pontificate for us on that question.
I feel like a broken record a little bit, but I think it will be driven by what the talent market wants. I feel like we went through a little bit of a slump during COVID. Nobody knew what the economy was doing. People weren't changing jobs. Nobody was hiring. And now we've seen a boom like we've never seen before. The talent market is so competitive that I think that companies will adapt to the way people want to work. And I think flexibility is a big one. People want flexibility in where they work and when they work, but they also want a strong sense of connection and belonging to their company. And so it's finding that fine line of providing flexibility as well as really clear, common goals that people can rally behind and really work hard to achieve. We think that's a great way for people to develop their connections and relationships with their coworkers. Being in the trenches, there's nothing that replaces that kind of like being in the trenches and feeling like you're solving a really hard problem with your team. And so I think it's finding the balance of how you do that in a hybrid model.
Awesome. I love that. Talent-led workplace strategy.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that I wish we had more time to talk about diversity and inclusion. I know you've been doing great things over at Podium on that front, but it sounds like it all is a part of the same story.
Yeah,
right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Any final thoughts before we send off here?
No, thanks for having me. I really appreciate being part of this conversation.
Thank you. Thanks. So Katie Morrow from Podium, amazing company. Everybody should be watching what they do over the next couple of years. If they went from 4 guys in an apartment to, or in a bike shop or an apartment, to 1,000 folks just across the freeway here, in a beautiful 2 buildings now.
Yeah.
And my name is Arian Lewis. I failed to do this at the beginning, but I'm the CEO of Kiln. We're a flex office and co-working company, which has around 250 tech companies here in Utah that base themselves with us. So if you are into the future of flex and work, you should come check us out if you're a young company. And hopefully we'll learn a lot more about what you do over the coming years. I actually thought that your insights were super interesting. The whole programmatic element around programming culture, especially engaging those remote workers through a clubs model where you actually incentivize the people. That's really unique. I've never heard of anybody saying that they're doing that. And I wish we could go on for an hour, but we hope you enjoyed this session of Models of the Future Workplace. Check out r0.com to learn a little bit more about this crazy robotic cleaning technology that can make you even safer while you're at work. And we wish you all very well. Cheers.
Thanks so much.